Versatile Mage. Chapter 321. Battle against the Razortail Drake. Bai Tingting slowly opened her eyes. She was expecting to see the disgusting stomach wall of the Razortail Drake, but it turned out to be sunlight, the blue sky, and clouds set aflame. Meanwhile, Zhao Manting and Mu Nu Zhao were staring at the person whose hair had almost reached his feet. He was definitely Mo Fan, but they could not believe he was the Mo Fan they knew. His face bore the signs of the wolf species, while his entire body displayed hereditary markings, like a curse. His hands had turned into a pair of sharp claws, currently holding the net with ease. His jumping ability was shocking. It felt like he was flying as he leapt between buildings more than 100 meters apart. Any ordinary human would have broken the bones from such jumps, but he was perfectly fine. Mo Fan continued to jump between the roofs as he made his way down to the ground, carrying the net firmly in his hand. If he weren't concerned that the 4 students would not be able to handle the impact of landing on the ground straight away, he would have been fine landing from his current height of 300 meters. Even Mo Fan could not describe his current status. It was similar to the burst of power his legs received after activating the blood tabby, but he could feel an even greater surge of power pouring into every part of his body. The power circulated in him and did not dissipate as easily as the blood tabby's strength. The degree of his strength was absolutely outstanding. It was on a totally different level from a human's body. If it weren't for retaining his human appearance, he would have believed he had turned into a demon beast with a remarkable lineage. Mo Fan felt himself becoming impetuous. He could still think, but he could not help feeling disgusted with the effort. The savagery, lust to kill, and anger in his bones were multiplied many times by the demon element. It felt like there was nothing he could not resolve with his fists. Nothing would trouble him anymore, as long as he killed them all. Now, Mo Fan felt like a demon kept in captivity for too long, finally regaining freedom. The first thought that came to his mind was to bring chaos and utter destruction to the entire world. Killing and destruction were the only rituals that could be tied to the body. He could not even understand why he had saved the 4 humans. He only knew an obsessive thought occupied his mind. It felt like an instinct implanted during the transformation. He would never allow anyone to touch them, not even a single hair. A deafening roar burst from the nest, echoing throughout the city. The giant lizards in the streets were aware of their leader's fury. They shivered and lowered their heads, awaiting his command. A giant beast poked out from the top of the chopped-off nest. It was the Razortail Drake. A part of its neck was dented, obviously the reason for its rage. On top of that, its favorite nest was destroyed. The Razortail Drake glanced down at the demonized Mo Fan and bellowed more deafening roars. Even the buildings began to shake violently. Finally, the giant beast glided down from the mound. Its enormous shadow loomed as its massive body slammed into the tall buildings, toppling them like Lego blocks. The demonized Mo Fan responded with a furious roar, too. Mu Nu Zhao, Zhao Manting, and Bai Tingting instantly covered their ears against the screeching pain. Killing was his nature, too. The demonized Mo Fan showed no intention of thinking for even a second. He only wanted to follow his instincts, to tear the damned big fat lizard in front of him into pieces. With an eerie whoosh, Mo Fan's figure vanished, and a wolf-shaped silhouette appeared under the Razortail Drake. The wolf shadow gradually materialized, before emerging as a wolf soul. Under the wolf soul stood a man, none other than the demonized Mo Fan. His face was savage, with an eerie grin. The power granted to him rumbled inside his body, urging him to spread his arms wide and roar into the sky. He extended his arms and stared fearlessly into the Razortail Drake's eyes. He howled like a wild wolf. Even the air vibrated. As he did, the soul shadow gradually enlarged, as if the surrounding buildings were being drawn into it. The wolf shadow lunged forward, launching itself at the diving Razortail Drake and tearing ferociously at its throat. The Razortail Drake brawled with the wolf shadow with its giant claws. One had great might due to its size, while the other was an irascible soul shadow displaying its wild nature. The razor-tailed drake turned out to be slightly stronger. It seemed to have discovered the wolf shadow's weakness. It blew out a strong gust of wind, capable of tearing apart buildings right at the wolf shadow's half-illusionary body. Part of the wolf shadow dispersed as if the wind were about to break it apart. Its claws left marks on the razor-tailed drake, but failed to damage its thick skin. "Come back," the demonized Mo Fan called to the wolf shadow. The wolf shadow rapidly returned to his body, making him look even more sinister. Chains of lightning stirred restlessly as the razor-tailed drake charged at Mo Fan. The purple energy had already run out of patience. After all, it symbolized destruction. The demonized Mo Fan howled again. His body was a human covered with bloody cursed lines, but his shadow was that of a dark werewolf. The arcs of lightning crackled wildly over him. Some spread to the streets, electrocuting the giant lizards. Mo Fan curled his hands into claws. He leapt into the air and struck forward with a claw, followed by the whip of arcing lightning. The shockwave tore the air apart and slammed into the razor-tailed drake's chest. Despite its scales being as strong as steel, the sharp claws pierced through its thick defense. Blood jetted out along the claw marks. Meanwhile, the lightning arcs following the swipe drilled into the wound and penetrated the razor-tailed drake's flesh. Chapter End. Versatile Mage. Chapter 322. Massacring the Lizard Ocean. The razor-tailed drake had a violent temper, too. It totally ignored the lightning penetrating it and bit at the demonized Mo Fan with its giant fangs. The razor-tailed drake's bite was not just the width of its mouth. The moment it opened wide, it summoned a sinking black void, sucking in everything within 100 meters, including streets, buildings, and the slow-to-react giant lizards. The demonized Mo Fan was right in the middle of the black void, surrounded by the razor-tailed drake's fangs. It turned out that the black void was linked to the razor-tailed drake's esophagus. It was planning to swallow the entire area. Mo Fan quickly leapt into the air, trying to escape the void's pulling force. However, the void had produced a whirlwind strong enough to drag objects outside its reach into the drake's throat. "So you like to swallow? Try swallowing this," Mo Fan sneered. Raising his arms high, a giant fireball appeared above his head. The fireball started at the size of a fire burst, but as Mo Fan's body was engulfed in flames, it expanded wildly. The fireball continued to enlarge, filling half the street. It felt like Mo Fan was holding a burning asteroid above him. His muscles flexed as he hurled the giant fireball into the black void. Since it led to the razor-tailed drake's throat, he would not mind blowing it, and the razor-tailed drake's stomach, up. The fireball drove down into the void. Although the void's force could shatter nearby buildings, it stood no chance against the overwhelming flames. The razor-tailed drake realized it was foolish to continue swallowing. It tried to stop the effect but could not before the fireball reached the void. There was a dull blast. The enormous razor-tailed drake's stomach rapidly expanded, reflecting the fireball's explosion inside. The razor-tailed drake writhed in incredible pain. It immediately opened its mouth wide to let the heat escape. Luckily, its throat and stomach wall were even sturdier than its skin. Otherwise, any other commander-level demon beast would have had its stomach blasted apart. Flames sprouted from the razor-tailed drake's body. It slammed wildly into nearby buildings, feeling its insides burning. There was no way it could expel all the flames quickly. The giant lizards and tyrant lizards shrieked at the sight of their leader in misery. They began charging toward the demonized Mo Fan fearlessly. However, there was no way Mo Fan, empowered by the demon element, would be intimidated. In fact, he had a strong desire to kill. His hands still curled into claws. Mo Fan stood on the street, glaring at the tide of giant lizards swarming toward him. A bunch of rubbish. He tore the air apart with a fierce ripping motion. The wolf shadow attached to his body repeated the action. The shadow of the claw swipe cut across half the street in less than a second. The shadow cut down the 2-kilometer-long street. Every giant lizard along that line was torn in half. A lengthy fissure of unknown depth was left on the street, while countless corpses of the slashed giant lizards lay on both sides. The blood only started spraying after a few seconds. It was hard to tell how many had died to the claw, but their blood eventually turned the fissure into a river. As Mo Fan pulled his hand back, the soul shadow followed. He locked his gaze on a particular tyrant earth lizard, significantly bigger than the others. The tyrant earth lizard had been camouflaging, waiting for the perfect time to strike and eat him alive. Unfortunately for it, Mo Fan had already noticed its existence. A tyrant lizard close to evolving, one considered the strongest among the warrior-level demon beasts. Did that make any difference? The demonized Mo Fan nimbly dodged as the beast's fangs swept past his face. He made his way to its tail before it could turn in time. Mo Fan's hands were still human-sized, but the soul shadows were huge. Clenching his hand, the soul shadow grabbed the long tail of the advanced tyrant lizard. The tyrant lizard, big enough to crush a building, was lifted into the air. It was flung 60 meters into the sky like a toy. The tyrant lizard struggled to regain balance, but at its peak, a bolt of thick purple-black lightning struck its head from above. The merciless lightning bolt penetrated its skull smoothly, as if nothing were in its path. The advanced tyrant lizard's body stiffened in the air. It was already dead before it hit the ground. Instant kill. Not far away, Zhao Manting was so shocked he almost dropped his jaw. The tyrant lizard was considered strong among warrior-level demon beasts, yet it was killed instantly by the demonized Mo Fan. The military wasn't just doing an experiment. They were trying to make a demon. The huge corpse of the tyrant earth lizard landed in front of Mo Fan, but he did not waste a second. He jumped onto its corpse and glanced ahead at the giant lizards swarming toward him. The razor-tailed drake's glowing eyes were full of anger. Since when did Jinlan City have such an annoying creature, possessing incredible strength despite his tiny size? The razor-tailed drake roared, summoning all its giant lizard minions. The number of giant lizards remained terrifying. They had totally occupied the area, their backs forming an ocean of scaled flesh in the street. They had gathered after being summoned by their leader. The demon beasts totally surrounded Mo Fan, trying to use their numbers to wear him out. Mo Fan just smirked. The little loach pendant on his neck shuddered suddenly. "Don't worry, they are all yours." The demonized Mo Fan growled, tapping the excited little loach pendant. His tone revealed his desire to massacre all the beasts. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 323. Chasing after the commander-level beast. The giant lizards gathered from all directions, led by the tyrant lizards. Meanwhile, their highest commander, the razor-tailed drake, was standing on top of a ruined shopping mall. Most of the structure had eroded away, and it could barely hold the weight of the razor-tailed drake, certain parts of it already beginning to collapse. Mo Fan's gaze at the razor-tailed drake across an ocean of giant lizards and a ravaged street that used to be the liveliest section in the city was full of provocation. It was obvious that the razor-tailed drake had thick skin, but it was still fairly lively after swallowing the giant fireball. Was its stomach made of steel? No wonder it was bold enough to swallow everything. That being said, it was rather naive trying to use its troops of giant lizards to buy some time. Vanishing Wolf Shadow. As he spread his arms, the soul shadow behind him began to contort as several shadow wolves jumped out of the giant shadow. With a point of his hand, the wolves dashed across the lengthy street. The wolves crossed paths with flickering claws. The power of the soul shadow was transformed into sharp weapons, piercing through the giant lizards with ease. The demon beasts were sliced in half from their heads to their tails. Some had clean cuts on their necks, some had their stomachs ripped open, while others were torn to pieces instead. The shadow wolves summoned by Mo Fan were like hungry ghouls. Their trails were fountains of bloody mist, the slow giant lizards butchered before they could react. A huge bloody mist swallowed the street, amputated limbs scattered in the air. It was quite impossible to see any giant lizard still in one piece when looking ahead. The shadow wolves were like amputating experts. Every demon beast was turned into pieces of meat regardless of how sturdy they were. The servant-class giant lizards stood no chance at all. They could only use their numbers by stacking into a long meat shield. Their chances of surviving were completely dependent on whether the shadow wolves passed close to them. Mo Fan clearly remembered the feeling he had when he first witnessed the savagery and cruelty of the demon beasts. He felt himself extravagantly tiny before them, and now, the tables had been turned. The demon beasts were petty and inferior as they were ordered around by the tyrant lizards. The entire pack of giant lizards could only be used as a sacrifice to protect their leader from a true expert's attack. The razortail drake had no mercy and love for its minions. As a matter of fact, the growth of a demon beast to commander level was only made possible through the countless deaths of demon beasts of the same species. Even if the entire pack were to die here, it would be fine as long as the razortail drake lived. The giant lizards continued to crawl in the demonized Mo Fan's direction. Mo Fan did not need to attack himself, as the wolf shadow on his back was enough of a nightmare for the giant lizards. Each time the sharp claws of the shadow wolves swiped through the air, a great chunk of blood and flesh would splatter out, while their soul remnants were sucked away by the pendant on Mo Fan's neck. Today was definitely the most exciting day for the little loach pendant ever. It continued to shiver on Mo Fan's neck, like a kid crying out in joy. It continuously absorbed the soul remnants, as if it would never have enough. On top of that, it seemed to have a bigger appetite the more it ate. The little loach pendant refused nobody, be it the soul remnants of servant-class demon beasts, the occasional soul essence that would pop up among the dead bodies, or the soul remnants of the tyrant lizards. It was happy to accept them all. The river inside the pendant was densely packed with glowing green dots. That being said, the little loach pendant was still the most interested in the razortail drake's soul. The little loach pendant had never tasted the soul of a commander-level demon beast before. Such a high-grade soul would be very useful in helping it to level up. A bunch of them are coming toward us. Zhao Manting cried out in panic. There was no way he could handle these many giant lizards on his own. Currently, Zhao Manting was the only one who could use magic among the four of them. Zhao Manting's scream immediately caught Mo Fan's attention. He turned around with a puzzled look. He ran forward and jumped around 100 meters away from Zhao Manting and landed right behind the group. The wolf blood lines on his legs began to glow brightly, as if the runes of a curse were freshly painted on him. They even started to pulsate. The glow from the bloody lines transformed into a murderous flicker as Mo Fan's legs began to accumulate an overwhelming dark energy. Mo Fan fired the crimson glow off with a kick, which slashed forward in a crescent shape. The giant slash sped forward at a crazy pace while staying parallel to the ground. "Brother, why are you kicking at the building?" Zhao Manting was left speechless. Mo Fan's attack was fairly shocking, but the problem was it was aiming at a building beside the street. However, halfway through Zhao Manting's grumble, Mo Fan kicked in another direction, firing another crimson crescent-shaped projectile at another building on the other side of the street. The two 30-meter crescents swept across the bases of the two buildings, cutting the cement walls and the supporting pillars in their paths. Without the support of the base, the two buildings slowly collapsed toward the street. They even collided into one another halfway during the fall and were smashed into debris before hitting the ground. The remains of the buildings crashed onto the street wildly, blowing the dust into the air. Debris stacked up and blocked the path of the giant lizards. It had formed a wall of steel and cement in front of the group, preventing the giant lizards from reaching Zhao Manting and the others. The wall had formed a protective barrier around the group, although Zhao Manting could not help but think that Mo Fan had gone a little overboard with his violent method. "It looks like the razortail drake is leaving." Zhao Manting suddenly pointed at the giant beast, which was flapping its wings. Mo Fan refocused his gaze on the razortail drake, which did happen to be rising into the sky while flapping its wings. A strong aura burst out from Mo Fan's body. He had no intention of letting the fat piece of meat go. He instantly disappeared with a flicker of motion. As Zhao Manting looked into the distance, he could see the demonized Mo Fan jumping continuously between the buildings, chasing after the razor-tailed drake. Why the hell are you chasing it? Zhao Manting was on the verge of breaking down. Did he seriously need to be that violent, chasing after a commander-level demon beast? Why can't we just leave this bloody place as soon as possible? Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 324. The Retreat of the Lizards. Mo Fan was utterly furious when he learned that the razor-tailed drake was flying away. He had to find a way to release the savagery in his bones. He was running at a crazy speed. He could even use his hands as claws while sprinting vertically up the tallest building, just like how he ran on the ground. At that moment, he was no different than a demon beast. As he reached the top of the building, Mo Fan finally caught a glance of the razor-tailed drake, which had already risen around 70 meters higher into the sky. He stooped slightly on the building, the exact same stance he used before. The burst of power launched him over 100 meters into the sky. His jumping ability was crazier than that of the Swift Star Wolf, as the Blood Serera had strengthened the lineage of the Swift Star Wolf a few times over. Wrapped around by the wolf shadow, Mo Fan sprang into the sky. He was propelling himself straight at the razor-tailed drake. The razor-tailed drake flapped its wings wildly, as if it had just seen a ghost. Normally, the razor-tailed drake would never allow anyone to trespass into its territory, but as soon as it realized how bizarre the intruder's strength was, it had decided not to fight against him again before having a clear understanding of what he was. To its surprise, the man was reluctant to give up. He was still chasing after it even though it had taken the initiative to withdraw from its territory. Was there something wrong with his mind? The razor-tailed drake was infuriated. It rapidly sucked the air around it into its stomach. The razor-tailed drake's body bloated. It resembled a giant balloon with wings from afar. Roar! The razor-tailed drake unleashed all the air in its stomach at the rapidly approaching Mo Fan. A shocking tornado spun through the sky. The tip of the tornado extended down right at the demonized Mo Fan, who was still rising like a rocket. Mo Fan was unable to control his body in the air. As a result, the razor-tailed drake's breath struck him heavily before trapping him inside the tornado. As the tornado fell from the sky, Mo Fan, who had lost his balance, was flung wildly toward an abandoned residential area overgrown with weeds. The entire area was smashed into pieces from the collision. A huge cloud of dust lingered in the air. Mo Fan, who was right in the center of the tornado, slammed hard into the pit the collision created. His body was covered in wounds, like he had been flogged with a whip. The wounds were not too deep, mere scratches on his skin. The tornado was still spinning above the residential area. Mo Fan rose to his feet as if he were perfectly unharmed. His extraordinary eyes stared at the razor-tailed drake flying up in the sky through the thick layer of dust. At the same time, the razor-tailed drake stared down at him in the sky. When it figured that he had only suffered a few scratches, it exhaled a furious breath from its nose. Where did this monster come from? He was tiny as a human, but the blood and bones in his body could match that of a commander-level demon beast. Why would I bother fighting against such a monster? The razor-tailed drake raised its head and uttered a commanding roar to the giant lizards on the streets. It flapped its wings and flew in the direction of Dongting Lake without turning its head back. The razor-tailed drake had already planned to move its territory. It was time for it to bring its minions back to their real nest. Following that command, the giant lizards withdrew like a tide. The previously rumbling streets quickly fell silent. Their tails and scaled backs disappeared into the distance as they followed their commander, the razor-tailed drake, into the horizon. The carpet of flesh swept through a certain direction in Jinlan City. The giant lizards had no instinct to protect the property. They trampled up the streets of the abandoned city and bulldozed the ruined buildings in their path. It was a spectacular view. It was true that the demonized Mo Fan killed the giant lizards like cutting vegetables, but there were just too many of them. It would take him more than a day and a night to totally wipe them out. Besides, It was only a small pack led by a commander-level razortail drake. It was impossible to imagine how terrifying the scale of the entire giant lizard horde at Dongting Lake would be. Another zone of the city was also destroyed beyond recognition due to the highly destructive advanced magic being cast upon it. It was the location where the battle between Zan Kong and the devil Lu Nian was taking place. Neither had managed to gain the upper hand in the battle so far. Lu Nian might be stronger than Zan Kong, but the latter was incredibly agile due to his wind element. He knew how to dodge Lu Nian's powerful attacks. The two had fought in the air and on the ground. More than 100 demon beasts had died from the fallout of the spells they had cast. They were both keeping an eye on the situation taking place at the center of the city, but they could not afford to lose their focus in a battle against a worthy opponent too. You're still weak as heck. If this is all you've got, you should just die and accompany her in hell. She must be missing you a lot down there, Lu Nian said with a cold grin. At the same time, he twisted the military braca on his wrist. The braca began to emit a brown magical glow, which rapidly wrapped around Lu Nian's body. This thing is called the petrifying braca. It can boost the power of my petrifying eyes significantly. Your defensive equipment is no longer usable, and the protection of your wind wings alone won't be enough to nullify my attack. Zan Kong, do you like the petrifying funeral that I have specifically arranged for you? Lu Nian burst into laughter. A petrifying equipment. This kind of equipment was extremely rare to find. It was specifically made for certain unique magic. Lu Nian had spent a great fortune just to acquire it. Initially, he thought he would only use it in war, but he never thought the first tester would be his old comrade Zan Kong. What perfect timing. Zan Kong frowned as he swiftly backed off. The equipment on Lu Nian's arm was unleashing a shocking energy. It was surely nothing ordinary. It would most likely be able to petrify a fourth of the city. He should keep a certain distance away. You're running away. Do you really think you have enough time for that? Lu Nian was accumulating his energy. It might seem like he would be channeling the cast for quite some time, but there was no way Zan Kong could make his way out of range in time. He did enjoy watching Zan Kong fleeing for his life, like a hunt between an eagle and a hare. The hare would assume it could make it to its burrow in time. However, the eagle had already calculated its speed and the distance from the burrow. The moment it dove from the sky, it had already decided the outcome of the hunt. Giving up already. The petrifying energy was unleashed from Lu Nian's body. None of the plants nearby were able to escape their fate, and were covered in a layer of gray-white substances. A soft touch alone would shatter them into pieces. Lu Nian suddenly realized that Zan Kong had stopped flying away. He was just standing there with a complicated expression, as if he had just seen something unbelievable. You better look behind you, Zan Kong said. Do you think this is a kid's game? Lu Nian snapped. Well, I did try to tell you. The astonishment on Zan Kong's face slowly disappeared. His eyes were fixed on Lu Nian, and the black shadow that was approaching him at an insane speed. Chapter End. Versatile Mage. Chapter 325. Go to Hell. Lu Nian was suddenly aware of something behind him when he felt a cold breath with a beastly presence. A demon beast. Impossible. His petrify would turn everything nearby into statues. No demon beast would be able to get close to him. Seeing the weird grin on Zan Kong's face, Lu Nian finally had no choice but to turn his head around. Within a blink, a face rapidly approached him with the speed of the wind, leaving him dumbfounded. Who's this? Why would the face be covered in crimson lines full of dark energy? The flicker from its eyes was utterly intimidating. Mo Fan. Lu Nian stared at the person in front of him in disbelief. It's me. Mo Fan wore a savage grin, to an extent that it revealed the cruelty in his bones. His voice was completely different than before, although his words sounded extremely familiar to him. I did say that the next time you saw me, I'd send a mongrel like you to hell. Mo Fan was unable to think clearly in his demonized state. However, The hatred he bore before turning into a demon was inerasable. The rage in his heart finally found a way out, that being to crush this disgusting, loathsome devil commander, soul and all, into pieces. Lu Nian was still lost in his thoughts. He could not actually tell if the person was still Mo Fan himself, or a total demon. He had seen many test subjects in person, and none of them were able to speak like a human after the transformation, as they had completely turned into monsters. They could not even retain their human appearance. On the other hand, apart from the bloody lines and the long white hair, Mo Fan had managed to keep his usual appearance. If he had yet to demonize completely, why would he have such a horrendous, deadly aura? Why would he have such eerie power? I can't let you die too quick. Why don't you give me a kowtow first? Mo Fan grinned and revealed his sharp fangs. As he finished the sentence, he grabbed the back of Lu Nian's head. To you, do you think you can still move standing so close to me? Ah, Lu Nian was hurled to the ground by Mo Fan with brute force before he could even finish his sentence. Lu Nian slammed on the ground with his face down. He did not have the time to defend himself. He was thrown to the ground like a dog with a great blow to his head. The ground used to be muddy, but it had turned solid as a rock from Lu Nian's petrify. Lu Nian was planning to use his power to turn his opponent into a dead statue, but he ended up testing the sturdiness of the rock with his own face. The rock shattered into a pile of dust. Lu Nian's head sank into the ground below like an ostrich, leaving him in incredible pain. As Lu Nian was an advanced magician, his flesh was significantly stronger than that of an ordinary human. If he was some servant-class demon beast, his head would have burst open, just like a watermelon dropped from a great height. On the other hand, his face was only slightly sunken, with blood smeared across it. I will never forgive you. Lu Nian's body quickly unleashed a golden glow, turning into a flexible armor wrapping around him. The armor was rather advanced, even providing protection to his head. As Mo Fan threw a punch right at his face, the golden armor had already covered it up. Mo Fan was not too bothered by the sudden appearing armor. He held Lu Nian up and clenched his right hand into a flaming fist. The fist that burned like a meteor was thrown right at Lu Nian's face. He did not even care about the protection of the golden armor. There was a fiery explosion as the punch landed on Lu Nian's face. The armor managed to resist most of the damage from the fire, preventing his skull from burning into ashes instantly. However, the impact from the punch still knocked out all his teeth and broke his nose. The golden armor shattered as it could not withhold the violent fist, revealing Lu Nian's distorted face, covered in blood. Petrify. Lu Nian was indeed an advanced magician. He still managed to cast an advanced magic despite the injury he was suffering from. His magic, strengthened by the braca he wore, burst out from Lu Nian's eyes in the direction he was looking. A gray-white energy spread rapidly in that direction. Lu Nian was extremely furious. All he could think of was to turn the kid into a rock and smash him into pieces with a kick. The demonized Mo Fan totally ignored the approaching threat. As he dashed toward Lu Nian, the gray-white substance covered his legs and rooted him to the rock under his feet. Mo Fan smashed his fist at the ground, which instantly burst out with a flame pillar that devoured the petrifying energy crawling up his legs. The gray-white substance had just spread across the area within 100 meters of Mo Fan when the flames surging up from the ground cracked them open. The two forces collided with one another, the area petrifying and cracking open in an endless loop. It felt like a rose-red army and a gray-white army were having a standoff with one another. Commander Lu Nian's eyes widened. The energy had originated from his eyes. His trembling body clearly indicated the strain he was enduring. His energy was usually strong enough to petrify the body of a commander-level demon beast. How could Mo Fan possibly stand a chance against it? Since Mo Fan had turned into a demon, why was it that he could still retain his thoughts, and still remember to get his revenge? You piece of scum, you should be thankful to me, as I gave you such power. Lu Nian blurted out resentfully. Mo Fan had demonized on his own. Thus Lu Nian did not even have the chance to place him under his control. Furthermore, Lu Nian had never thought Mo Fan would be able to demonize so perfectly, even retaining his human appearance. He was able to speak and retain memories of the past while also being granted overwhelming strength. If this kid had such terrifying strength after demonizing while he was only an intermediate magician, if he could survive the after effects and further improve his cultivation, he could easily become a demon that would shock the entire world. He could easily trample the supreme magicians, the commander-level demon beasts, even the ruler-level demon beasts under his feet. I should thank you, indeed. The demonized Mo Fan displayed his anger and savagery as he laughed grimly and exposed his sharp fangs. Which is why I'm sending you to hell now. Chapter end. Please guys like, comment, share, and subscribe.